Hello everyone, it's Philip from Limitless, and I haven't interviewed anyone in a long while, but I'm very happy to be back, and this time with our very own Nico Alabas, who just finished in the top 8 of the Stuttgart Regional Championships. Yeah, first off, congratulations, Nico. And you played the Zorak Execute deck, which basically everyone considers to be the best deck in Expanded, and for fairly obvious reasons, because you have to admit the deck is quite broken indeed. So, when preparing for this tournament, what did you do, what did you think, and how did you end up with your deck choice?
I mean, my initial testing didn't really start as testing, but we had like the expanded tournament on PTCGO, so like the 24 ticket tournament. So I decided to just try out the deck, and it felt super broken. So there was no reason to like not still considered for the tournament. And then when the actual testing started, I initially wanted to play Drumper Garb most because I was like, okay, most people are probably playing Zoroark or trying to counter it, so it's gonna be like one of the best decks if it actually proves to be as good. But then I played the deck in testing, and it compared to Zorok, it felt like way too weak and too fair in some weird way because it's still kind of a standard deck, but in a format that's like way faster and stuff.
Yeah, I
So I
think
decided that Zorok is just
yeah, I think the issue here is that
better.
Zorak and the form in general are just so fast paced, and it's like trading hits really quickly and dealing lots of damage and taking one shots, and there's Drampa Garb, and if you just can't stab your opponent in the early game and in the trade-off at some point you will or don't do a supporter, then Zorak just runs through your deck, and it happens too often. At least in my testing it felt like this. But well, anyways, so much to your tournament preparation. Let's look at your deck list. First of all, of course, there's the 4 for Zorak line and the 4 executes, which is fairly standard. But then you have 4 tech Pokemon and you have 3 Shaman to Lele. So run us through those counts and those choices quickly.
I mean, Zorok and the Zorok line and the executes, as you said, are super standard, so there's really nothing to talk about. And two Lele and three Shaman. Some people, for some reason, played three Lele and two Shaman, but if you think about the deck, it just makes more sense to play more Shaman because, first of all, of course, the format is faster, you have Skyfield, so if you play more Shaman, you kind of have a deck like Mega Ray used to be, where you just draw an insane amount of cards during a turn to draw into all of your combo pieces, which in Zorok obviously is even easier because you can trade as well. And Lele, you don't play that many supporters, and after your first one or two battle compressors, there will be supporters anyways in your discard. So Lele really doesn't have any targets in your deck anymore. So usually you just bench them for no reason or just trade them away. So there's really no reason to keep the three Lele counts. So it makes way more sense to just play three Shaman.
Yes, of course, the Shaman also helps to get really a strong turn 1 plays with red card and stuff like that. And yeah, it also helps to draw out of low hand sizes. Then the Sudowoodo is of course fairly standard. There's not much to say about the Sudowoodo. You basically have to play it in a Zorak dominated format just to limit the options of a Zorak player. But you also tagged Oranguru, Oricorio, and the Breakthrough Zorak. So, what do you have to say about these choices?
I mean, the Zoroark, I initially didn't want to play it, but after some mirror testing, I found out that it just makes sense to play it because you get to put your opponent onto an uneven amount of prize cards, while also taking a one-shot knockout on a Zoroark. So it definitely makes sense, and it also can come in handy in some other matchups. For example, I use it against Greninja because it's just an easy way without Skyfield to one-shot Greninjas. So that made sense, and yeah, Oricorio. Um, I expected more night march than we actually had in the end because Germany used to be like reigned by night march basically when it still was a thing. So I felt like, okay, some people might just go back to the deck, but in the end it's also pretty useful against Lucario, which turned out to be pretty present, and also against stuff like Buzzwole, Lycanroc. So it definitely made sense, and worst case you trade it away or just bench it as another bench Pokemon, because in some matchups like Glaceon you just want to draw into basic Pokemon because you can't really like afford to use eggs and stuff. Just some weird scenarios where it's just nice to have more basics. And yeah, Oranguru is just to beat Mill, because if you play one Oranguru you just beat Mill.
Oh, you mentioned that Varicorio is useful against Lucario. I guess your plan is to put like 1 damage counter on all Variolus and Lucario so he can't focus sash, or do you actually attack with it, like with a 30 attack?
I mean, of course, like you can put damage onto Raiolus or Lucarios to just prevent them from using Focus Sash unless they want to Ace Roller a 1 damage Riolu or Lucario. And on the other side, you can also, like, if you know your opponent is low on Guzmas and maybe doesn't even have Auxiliary anymore because you managed to take the knockout when you had some time, you can just attack with Oricorio into Lucario because you usually have to two-shot it in a lot of cases anyways. So you can just deal 120 in a Lucario, and even if, I mean, why would he GX your Oricorio? And worst case, if Oricorio gets KO'd, your opponent just takes 1 prize.
Alright, so much to the Pokemon. Then the energy line, yeah, I'm not really sure if there's anything at all to say. The only thing I could imagine was arguing if a 50C would theoretically be good, but that's, yeah, that doesn't have a place here. So let's ignore the energies and move on to your supporter line. Yeah, we have 2 Chorus, 2 Bridget, 2 Hexmaniac, a Getsus and a Guzma. Now, there's not much to say about the one Guzma. You don't use it a lot, but it's an option you need to have. You don't use it a lot because everyone plays Pseudo Voodoo, so if you're Guzma, you can only deal 100 damage, which is, of course, comparably little if you could deal 210 to the active instead. But the other supporters, why did you choose those counts, and did you consider any other supporters?
I mean, I started off my testing with 3 Chorus, but when I got into later stage of testing, I just figured out that in a lot of cases I just discard multiple Chorus with Battle Compressor or just trade them away because you need Chorus to set up, but in most matchups that want to counter you, which like is the most relevant matchup basically because people were expecting the Rock and the Mirror, you usually want to Hex anyways, so you don't have that much like late game Chorus. So going to 2 Chorus made sense. And I also started off by playing N and Getsus because I wanted to have some late game options, but N proved to be pretty weak, especially against decks that run Zoroark or Octillery anyways. But Getsus is pretty useful for turn 1, but also in the late game you can shuffle away Verse Seekers, for example, if your only win condition for your opponent is like Verse Seeker for Guzma. So that's a nice thing, so I decided to stick with one Getsus instead.
Alright, and then to move on to the items, there of course for Ultra Ball, for VS Seeker and for Puzzle of Time, which are the absolutely great utility cards of the Zoroark deck. Versus Seeker is of course one of the strongest cards you get to play in Expanded, so to just reuse your supporters and be more versatile. The Puzzle of Times are a staple in every Zoroark deck because you can draw into them quite easily and recover whichever cards you need for the game. And Ultra Ball is in Expanded particularly good because you have those executes. So in Ultra Ball, most of the time will just search out a Pokemon from your deck without any drawback, which is of course absolutely amazing, consistency-wise. But to the other cards, okay, there of course Free Skyfield, not much to say about it. That's the standard count. I agree with it. No need for more. Less would be well, very greedy. And yeah, it just allows your Zoroark to deal insane amounts of damage. But let's talk about the other cards. So about your Battle Compressor. So you chose a higher Battle Compressor count than usual. You chose a higher Field Blower count than usual. And yeah, just tell us about these items.
Battle Compressor I tested every count between 2 and 4, so 2, 3 and 4. 2 was way too little. I really don't see why everyone in Costa Mesa decided to play 2, because the card is just way too good to not play at least 3 of them. But 4 oftentimes felt too much, because I often like had a Battle Compressor left in my deck, or discarded one with the third one anyways. So I decided to go with 3, which also allowed me to have more space for tech cards. Example, the second Field Blower, which, yeah, once again, Drumpagab, I expected it to be way more around and also way more played by the good players, by like the expected players to make cut and stuff. So I decided to go with 2 Field Blowers, because 1 Field Blower is like, you have to be very lucky to actually draw into it when you need it against Garb. So I decided to go with 2, because yeah, it makes Garb a lot more doable and actually pretty like comparable easy to other counter matchups. And it's also good to like get rid of Focus Sash, get rid of Parallel. It's just a very versatile card, so I decided to go for 2.
Alright, and then there were red cards, Choice Band, Floatstone, Communication. Those are quite fairly standard cards, but can you anyways tell us why did you choose those counts?
I mean, I up until Friday, I only had one red card in my deck, so I felt like it was enough. But in the end, I decided that the mirror is probably the most relevant matchup, and having red card is just so good. And also against other decks, like you can turn one red card, and it's good against a lot of decks. So I decided to go with two of them. Then choice went the standard, as you said, and Floatstone. Sometimes you miss the second one for if your only Floatstone is priced, but that's like the only case. And I didn't feel like playing two Floatstones just because it might come in handy if one is priced. So I decided to only go with one, and if it's priced, then you can still manually retreat and or Guzma and stuff. So I felt like one is enough. And communication, one is the basically standard count, and I didn't feel the need for two because it's mostly relevant in turn 2 to set up your Zoroarks, and after that you don't really use it anymore. So I felt like one is definitely enough.
Alright, so much to your list. Let's some honorable mentions that you didn't include that might interest people are the Executor and the other Baby Zorak from Black and White. So, what do you think about those cards, and did you ever feel like you would like to have had them in your list, or like you had the inferior Zorak in your deck?
I mean, you probably mean Zorua, but no,
The Zorak. I mean the Zorak instead of the stand-in breakthrough.
Oh, you mean the okay,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the other Baby Zoroark is basically only good against Buzzwole, and that's about it. And I mean, that's not a matchup you struggle against anyway, so there's really no point in playing it. So if you have the space for a Baby Zoroark, it makes way more sense to play the one that's good in a mirror match. And yeah, Executor, people say it's good in a mirror, and of course it's also good against Wailord, but against Wailord and other mill decks you have Oranguru, so there's no point to put it for that. And in the mirror I played against some people online that played Executor, and I never had any issue to deal with the matchup because it's just so slow, and it's only good if your opponent really has nothing to work with. So I really didn't like the card and didn't even consider it for the tournament.
Alright, yeah, in the mirror match you usually want to use like 3 Zorak GX and then one non-X perhaps. So I guess like playing multiple non-X attackers is a little excessive. Especially when sometimes your opponent will go first and just take the first knockout on a non-X, and then you don't want to use a non-X because it would just put your opponent at even prices again. Well, however, so we talked about your list and about your thoughts. Now it's interesting to hear how your tournament went. So how did your deck run through the tournament? Were you very satisfied with it? And were there like any particularly hard matchups or very memorable games that you'd like to talk about?
I mean, matchup-wise, the tournament was pretty like well-rounded. If you think about what I played against, because I heard of some people, for example, that played against multiple like mirrors or played against multiple like mill decks, for example. But I played against like 8 different decks in 8 rounds, and they were all like winnable, mostly winnable because of consistency, and that's also why I liked my second Bridget, because it allowed me to not have like the odds of having 2 prizes very low. So most of the time you have access to turn 1 Bridget, which makes every matchup a lot easier because you actually get to set up. And the hardest matchup by far was against Glaceon, and the games were also super weird. It was against Adam Hawkins, and game 1 I basically donked his Lele because he didn't have much else. Game 2 I had to scoop after 2 or 3 turns because I used the puzzle to check my next top decks, and they were all like bad cards for the next 3 turns, so I just scooped. And then the last game was actually a normal one, but because I was able to set up, I won the game, because it's usually Glaceon is only then good against Zoroark if you, of course, if you set up Barbaracle as well, it's pretty bad for Zoroark. But if they don't have the turn 1 Glaceon, or you at least get a Bridget and stuff or Colress in your hand to set up, then the matchup gets way easier, so it's not that bad of a matchup as some people might think. So yeah, that was the hardest matchup, but overall, also Gardevoir was also pretty hard because I red card Hex chained him in game 2, and he managed to draw out of it every time, so that made it pretty tough. But other than that, every matchup was like super doable.
Alright, thanks a lot. The last thing I'm curious about is your general thoughts about Expanded. The font isn't too popular, but anyway, so what do you think about the format?
Might seem weird coming from me because I got a lot of points from the expanded tournaments I played, but I really dislike the tournament, the like expanded format, because I mean there are, in some way it's an enjoyable format because you have such a variety of cards and your decks are consistent and stuff, so you actually get to play the game. But on the other hand, you have cards that really make the game unenjoyable. You have cards like Redsis gets the Redsis
Yeah, I guess you
Red
mean
card
red
gets
card
this combination, and Hexmaniac and all these cards in combination, and then you also have stuff like the Skyfield, Execute, Interaction with Zorak. It's just a little bit too broken, and yeah, well, without these cards, Expanded would just be a more consistent standard format, so I think that would be more enjoyable for people. We still have to, I mean, it's only a couple of days until the next banned list update, and I personally hope they do something. They don't necessarily have to ban entire decks, but at least try to make the format more enjoyable for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for your opinion. I also agree with it. I think Expanded has obvious flaws where this would need to be fixed, and were mostly caused by Zorak being too central to the format. But anyways, let's see what's happened. Thank you for your time. Congratulations again to your finish. I hope everyone that watched this enjoyed this interview, and I'm looking forward to bringing more interviews in the future.